This is my trim color tier list for 2024. My first tier list on this channel, but I figured why not start now? If you're not familiar with what tier lists are, they're just an awesome way of just ranking things in beautiful graphical fashion. I've gathered 16 different trim color options that I think people may gravitate towards, and just give you my ranking from S tier being the ultimate trim color that works all the time, and then the bottom of the barrel D tier for those trim colors that are either very niche, very specific, or they're just pretty crappy. I wanted to start with the non-painted trim option. Wooden trim. There could be some sort of clear coat or varnish on it, but essentially it's just wood. You see the wood grain. It was popular at some point, but currently this is going to be a D tier option for me. And the reason for that is 9 times out of 10, I'm seeing people paint over wooden trim. And yes, there is the odd case where, hey, it's really charming. The thing about wooden trim is it is what it is, which means everything else has to cater to that trim. And if you really want it to be the feature of the house, I mean, great. Kind of dated look though, so not really good for me. D for dated wooden trim. Next up, we have black trim. Increasingly more and more popular. I think it has a lot of really cool use cases, especially in a more industrial design sort of style. So I think I would put black trim in the B tier. Kind of like white, but in the opposite direction. It's going to be very free of undertones usually, which means you don't necessarily need to worry so much about the other colors surrounding it, because it has that clear contrast to it. But I think just slightly ahead of black trim for me, while we're at it, is off black trim, or a bit of a charcoal kind of gray trim. By going with a charcoal kind of color instead of a super dark black, it gives you a little more opportunity for some nuance and just overall softness. Sometimes you don't necessarily need to go with the brightest white, so you don't always need to go with the deepest black either. Charcoal gray is kind of that happy medium where you get a lot of contrast, but still some interesting characteristics. Now let's get into some colors. So green is one that I'm very much fond of. Not necessarily as a trim color, at least the darker, deeper greens. I think dark green really shines as a feature color, an accent color. You could make an argument for a dark green trim and baseboard, but I don't think it's something that you'll see very often. Navy blue, on the other hand, I have seen it at least more often than dark green, so it's also in the C tier for me, but slightly ahead of green, just because I think it is a more accepted dark color in the industry. So you're gonna see a lot more people using dark blues on things like cabinets. So making the transition to baseboards and doors and frames, it is a little more palatable, I think, but still not something that's gonna be very popular at all. And then for fun, I saw this picture and I figured why not include it in red as a trim color. Gotta put it in the D tier. This is definitely not a trim color I would ever subscribe to. Okay, so those are the darker color options. What are some mid-tone trim options that we like to see? The first one being gray. Gray to me, I would probably put at C tier. And the reason for that is this specific gray is kind of that cooler leaning gray, the one that you don't really see too often. If you have it surrounded with warmer colors, it's going to stand out in a peculiar way. An option that I prefer that's like a darker mid-tone gray that has some warmth to it would be taupe trim. I think it's B tier for me, but just behind black, because black has that nice contrasty element to it, but it's an interesting option that I don't think a lot of people consider. Taupe is a combination of brown and gray, but taken to a fairly deep degree. Warm cream. This is going to be bottom of C tier currently. There are some cases where this could be a good look, but I think in a lot of cases, creamy yellowy trim ends up looking like old oil-based paint that has yellowed over time. In fact, you know what? Bringing it down to D tier. How's that? D tier because it's getting dunked on by me. Now next up we have another green, but this one is lighter. It's a bit of a sage green, a lighter mid-tone color. And this one, I think I might just bring it A tier. So I'm really biased towards greens. The dark green, probably not a good choice, but once you have something that is a very subtle, dusty sage green, I think that changes things quite considerably, especially on wainscoting, paneling, nice looking doors, anything that you want to accentuate. I think sage green is an awesome color to incorporate. If you have a lot of natural organic textures happening here, it's gonna look beautiful. At least I think so, because I'm a green guy. I love green. So continuing on with these mid-tone lighter colors, we have beige, which is not a color that you would think of for trim. I don't necessarily think you should think of it, so I'm gonna put it into C tier, just behind gray. Gray and beige, they're often compared as neutrals, but in terms of trim colors, I think beige just looks out of place. In some cases, it could look really cool and intentional when you do decide to switch it up, but I probably wouldn't recommend it to a lot of people. A much better alternative to me is grayish. And I think grayish is A tier. It gives you way more flexibility than a straight up beige or a gray. And a really great way to implement this is whatever grays you pick for the walls, you can take a trim color that's 2 or 3 shades darker or lighter. There you go. The last 4 are all white paint colors. Cool white. So this is going to be those white paint colors that have maybe a touch of gray and in some rare cases even a bit of blue, but usually it's just gray that gives it the illusion of a bit of a blue glow. To me, I think cooler whites are going to go into B tier, and I'm going to put it ahead of charcoal gray. I think cool whites are great when used in conjunction with cooler wall colors because they aren't going to clash as much, but I've always found they look a little unnatural. And I think depending on which one you go with, if that kind of blue undertone is cranked up a little too much, just looks a bit off. It's not necessarily my favorite, especially in the white category. Now, what about warm whites? So these are going to be, you know, maybe alabaster or cloud white, Swiss coffee. I would put this at the top of the A tier. I think white trim colors that have that warm touch just give you a nice comforting glow. You don't want to go too far with that warmth, otherwise you'll find yourself in D tier with cream. So just the right amount of warmth that's almost subtle is good enough to put you in that A tier category, which I think is great. So 2 whites left. We have super bright whites. These are going to be the brightest whites possible. I would probably put this the bottom of A tier. So I try to steer people clear of those bright, mega vibrant whites that exist, especially on things like walls, but also on trim. I feel like it's not always the best decision to just immediately go right for the brightest. So I am talking about Chantilly lace. I'm talking about high reflective white. The ultra bright whites, they're good. They're A tier. I mean, they're gonna give you a really nice crisp trim, but they're not gonna be my favorite choice for trim. The only trim color I'm gonna put in S tier in 2024 is going to be the soft stark white. This is my favorite trim color because it takes what Chantilly lace does and makes it not as insane. And the reasoning for that is it's a clean, stark white, like those really bright whites, but the brightness is toned down just a tad to give you a much more pleasant appearance to the eye. So still bright, still clean, but a lot more tame and just chilled out. But what's your favorite trim color? Let me know down below. We got another video right over here.